Good evening. The Manchester GP, Harold Shipman, is tonight starting 15 life sentences for murder, making him Britain's worst serial killer of modern times. The jury at Preston found him guilty on all 15 charges of killing women patients and on one charge of forging a will. Sentencing him, Mr. Justice Forbes said Shipman had murdered each and every one of his victims by a calculated and cold-blooded perversion of his medical skills.
Born the middle child into a working-class family on January 14th, 1946, Harold Frederick Shipman was the favourite child of his domineering mother, Vera. She instilled him into an early sense of superiority that tainted most of his later relationships, leaving him an isolated adolescent with few friends. When his mother was diagnosed with a terminal lung cancer, he willingly oversaw her care as she declined. He was fascinated by the positive effect that the administration of morphine had on her suffering, until she died from a disease on June 21st, 1963. He was devastated by her death. He was determined to go to medical school, and after months and months of studying, he was admitted to the Leeds University Medical School for training. Although he was still a loner, he met his future wife, Primrose, at the age of 19. They were married when she was 17, and 5 months pregnant with their first child. By 1974, he was a father of 2 and had joined a medical practice in Todmorden in Yorkshire, where he initially thrived as a family practitioner, before allegedly becoming addicted to the painkiller pethidine. He forged prescriptions for large amounts of the drug, and he was forced to leave the practice when he got caught by his medical colleagues in 1975, at which time he entered a drug rehab program. He received a small fine and a conviction for the forgery. A few years later, Shipman joined another practice called Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde, where he integrated himself as a hard-working doctor who enjoyed the trust of patients and colleagues alike. He worked there for almost 20 years, and his behaviour incurred only minor interest from the healthcare professionals. The local undertaker noticed that Dr. Shipman's patients seemed to be dying at an unusually high rate and exhibited similar poses in death. Most were fully clothed, and usually sitting up or reclining in a settee. He was concerned enough to approach Shipman about this directly, who reassured him that there was nothing to be concerned about. Another medical colleague, Dr. Susan Booth, also found the similarity disturbing, and the local coroner's office were alerted, who in turn contacted the police. A covert investigation followed, but Shipman was cleared. It appeared his records were in order. The inquiry failed to contact the General Medical Council or check any criminal records, which would have yielded evidence of Shipman's previous record. Later, a more thorough investigation revealed that Shipman had altered the medical records of his patients. Hiding behind his status as a caring family doctor, it's almost impossible to establish exactly when Shipman began killing his patients, or indeed exactly how many died at his hands, and his denial of all charges did nothing to assist the authorities. His killing spree was only brought to an end thanks to the determination of Angela Woodruff, the daughter of one of his victims, who refused to accept the explanations given for her mother's death. Her mother was Kathleen Grundy, an active, wealthy 81-year-old widow. Following an early visit by Shipman, she was found dead in her home on June 24th, 1998. Angela was advised by Shipman that an autopsy was not required. Angela was a lawyer and had always handled her mother's affairs, so it was with some surprise that she discovered that another will existed, leaving the bulk of her mother's estate to Dr. Shipman. Angela was convinced the document was a forgery and that Shipman had murdered her mother, forging the will to benefit from her death. She alerted the local police, where Detective Superintendent Bernard Postles quickly came to the same conclusion on examination of the evidence. Kathleen Grundy's body was exhumed, and a post-mortem revealed that she died from a morphine overdose, administered within 3 hours of her death, precisely within the time frame of Shipman's visit to her. Shipman's home was raided, yielding medical records, an odd collection of jewellery, and an old typewriter which proved to be the instrument upon which Grundy's forged will had been produced. It was immediately apparent to the police from the medical records seized that the case would extend further than a single death in question. Shipman had urged families to cremate their relatives in a large number of cases, stressing that no further investigation of their deaths was necessary. Even in instances where these relatives had died of causes previously unknown to the families. In situations where they did raise questions, Shipman would provide computerized medical notes that backed up his cause of death pronouncements. Police later established that Shipman would, in most cases, alter these medical notes directly after killing the patient to ensure that his account matched the historical records. What Shipman failed to grasp was that each alteration of the records would be time-stamped by the computer, enabling the police to ascertain exactly which records had been altered. Following extensive investigations, which included numerous exhumations and autopsies, the police charged Shipman with 15 individual counts of murder on September the 7th, 1998, as well as 1 count of forgery. Shipman's trial commenced in Preston Crown Court on October 5th, 1999. Angela Woodruff, Kathleen Grundy's daughter, appeared as the first witness. Her forthright manner and determination to get the truth was what impressed the jury. Fingerprint analysis of a forged will showed that Kathleen Grundy had never handled the will, and her signature was dismissed by a handwriting expert as a crude forgery. The government pathologist led the court through some gruesome post-mortem findings, where morphine toxicity was the cause of death in most instances. A police computer analyst then testified how Shipman had altered his computer records to create symptoms that his dead patients never even had, in most cases within hours of their death. As the trial progressed onto other victims and the accounts of their relatives, the pattern of Shipman's behaviour became much clearer. A lack of compassion, disregard for the wishes of attending relatives, and reluctance to attempt to revive patients were bad enough. But another fraud came to light. He would pretend to call the emergency services in the presence of relatives, then cancel the call when the patient was discovered to be dead. Telephone records showed that no actual calls were made. Finally, evidence of his drug hoarding was introduced, with false prescribing patients who didn't require morphine, over-prescribing to others who did, as well as proof of his visits to homes of a recently deceased to collect up unused drug supplies for disposal. Shipman's demeanour throughout the trial did nothing to assist his defence in painting a picture of a dedicated healthcare professional. Despite their attempts, his arrogance and constantly changing stories when caught out in obvious lies did nothing to endear him to the jury. On the afternoon of January 31st, 2000, the jury were sufficiently convinced by the testimony and evidence presented and unanimously found Shipman guilty in all charges, 15 counts of murder and 1 of forgery. The judge gave him 15 life sentences, as well as a 4-year sentence for the forgery, which he commuted to a whole life sentence. effectively removing any possibility of parole. Shipman was incarcerated at the Durham prison. The fact that a doctor had killed 15 patients sent a shudder through the medical community, but this was to prove insignificant in light of further investigations that delved more deeply into his patient case list history. A clinical audit conducted by Professor Richard Baker of the University of Leicester examined the number and pattern of deaths in Harold Shipman's practice and compared them with those of other practitioners. It found that rates of death amongst his elderly patients were significantly higher, clustered at certain times of the day, and that Shipman was in attendance in a disproportionately high number of cases. The audit goes on to estimate that he may have been responsible for the deaths of at least 236 patients over a 24-year period. Separately, an inquiry commission chaired by the High Court Judge Dame Janet Smith examined the record of 500 patients who died whilst in Shipman's care. The 2,000-page report concluded that it was likely that he murdered at least 218 of his patients. Although this number was offered by Dame Janet as an estimation rather than a precise calculation, as certain cases presented insufficient evidence to allow for certainty. The commission further speculated that Shipman might have been addicted to killing. He may in fact have taken his first victim within months of obtaining his license to practice medicine. He remained at Durham prison throughout these investigations, maintaining his innocence, and was staunchly defended by his wife Primrose and family. He was moved to the Wakefield prison in June 2003, which made visits from his family easier. On January 13, 2004, Shipman was discovered at 6 AM hanging in his prison cell at Wakefield, having used his bedsheets to tie to the window bars of his cell. There remains some mystery about the whereabouts of his remains, with some people claiming that his body is in a Sheffield morgue, while others believe that his family have custody of his body. Some people believe he was murdered in his cell. Whatever the exact number, the sheer scale of his murderous activities meant that Shipman was catapulted from British patient killer to the most prolific known serial killer in the world.